All right, welcome to the Photoshop Workbook. This is a 12-chapter workbook to introduce the core concepts of Photoshop and then some of the advanced techniques that would be needed in a professional career, either as an artist or as a graphic designer. As you move forward, you might want to download the files. They're available on my website. Link is in the description below. Feel free to grab it if you want to be able to do these exercises directly. To get started, let's take a look at the program Photoshop itself. So we want to take a look at the layout of both the home screen and the workspace. We want to learn how to open, save, and close our documents. And we want to introduce a couple of core concepts like layers, selections, masks. And then we'll take a look at two tools in depth, the Move tool. And then we'll look a little bit at the Text tool and Crop tool. Okay. So this is our home screen. So when you first open up Photoshop, you'll get this. Yours probably won't have these images right here because currently it is displaying stuff that was recently opened. Across the top is going to be our menu bar. So this is where we could get to our preferences and file open, and then a bunch of menus that are going to be grayed out. These are going to be grayed out until you switch to your workspace. You can switch to your workspace really easily simply by clicking on this PS icon up here in the top left, taking you to the screen where it's the big area where you're going to be doing all of your edits and changes. And I'll just click this home button for now to return back to my home screen. Also across the top of my screen is this cloud icon. This tells me my current sync status and storage for anything in my Adobe Creative Cloud. Adobe Creative Cloud storage can be really neat if you're working across multiple devices, or you do a lot of stuff capture on your phone, you need to transfer it to your computer. So that's what most of my storage is. This is mostly a Lightroom mobile storage. Or if you're working part of a team, it's a really easy way to share documents with other people in programs like InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. Then we have a search feature, which we're not going to use. We have this present icon, which is actually kind of stupid and neat at the same time. Photoshop changes all the time. It updates and you get new stuff like generative fill and expand and other things like that, which we'll actually use later in this textbook. But frequently when you open up Photoshop after updating, you just need to get to work and you don't really have time to putz around and see what's new. This present icon lets you come back and see what's new. And then you have a Creative Cloud icon. If you click on this, it will launch a web browser, allowing you to, look at your current subscription status and fun things like that. Over on the left, we have new file and open file, which are pretty straightforward. It's new file and how to open a file. It's nothing magical. Then we have the home button, which is the current setup you see from my screen. It will display anything recently opened. Then we have learn, which is pretty good, honestly. Adobe recognizes that their software is complex and difficult to learn. So they've made a pretty good set of introductory tutorials right here that are worth looking at. If we go through the selection chapter and you're still a little lost, it might not be a bad idea to come and grab some of these to help you understand exactly what's going on. Then we have files, which refers to the stuff up here in my storage. So this is where I could access things that are stored in my own storage, shared with you. So from working with part of the team, this is where they could access it. Lightroom photos. Again, Lightroom is a program used by professional photographers for organizing and editing their photos. It's kind of like a combination between Bridge, which we'll look at in Chapter 4, and Adobe Camera, which we'll also look at Chapter 4. And then anything that's recently deleted. Finally, we have this Behance Learn More thing. This is literally an advertisement, so I don't know, I know why they're putting advertisements in here because Adobe wants your money. But this is just an advertisement. We don't care about it. So to learn our other part of our workspace, we're going to make this image. So let's go ahead and open up our base image, which is going to be this yawning guy. And to open my image, I can come up to File and go to Open. I could hit Command or Control O. I could click Open. I could right click on the file and pick Open with Photoshop. I could click and drag the file over Photoshop, or I could click and drag it over the Photoshop icon, blah, 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 blah. In Photoshop, frequently there's going to be 20 ways of doing exactly the same thing. Now, when we get to different ways of doing the same thing that have different differences between them, I'll talk about it. So when we were adding files to an already open file, there's a bunch of ways to do it, and they all kind of do it a little differently. I'll explain those differences. Otherwise, if you see me doing something and you have a way that you prefer doing it and it comes to the same outcome. So I'm just going to click Open here, but if you want to hit Command or Control O, cool. Go ahead and do whatever method is the fastest and laziest for you. our goal in Photoshop isn't always to get the best result. We need good results, but our goal is to be fast and lazy. Because in most professional places, once your result hits an acceptable or good level, it's how fast can you get to that spot. So whatever method gets you to an acceptable spot, but is the fastest and laziest for you, please use. So open. I'm going to go to my desktop where I have my textbook files. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my yawning guy. Now, if you're on a Windows computer, yours will look a little different than this. It's the same thing. You'll just go through File Explorer instead of Finder. I'll go ahead and click Open. This takes me to my workspace. So my workspace is split up into a couple of areas. So the image here is what we're going to call our canvas. Now, if you have multiple images in this black area, which is our workspace, it'll switch to a name called artboards. And it's not something we're going to putz with in these 12 chapters. In advanced Photoshop stuff, you might have multiple artboards. Generally, if you're going to be having multiple artboards, the file sizes will start getting pretty big. So we're going to keep it simple and avoid the artboard and just stick with canvases for now. And again, for functionality, the difference is like how many objects do you have in your workspace. Up at the top, we have our menu bar. So image, file, and so on. We'll be using these a lot in these chapters. Below it, we have our home button to take us back to the home screen, and we have our tool option bar. So our tool option bar, as the name suggests, are different options for when I have different tools active. Over here on the far right of the tool option bar, I have share for sharing with other people if I'm working as part of a team, the search and help feature again, and then workspaces. So I can change the layout of my tools with these, and this can be really handy. So let's say we've been doing a bunch of stuff and we've just trashed our workspace and stuff is just all over the place and I can't find anything. One thing that you can do to restore your original workspace is to come up to the top right and click reset whatever workspace you're in. Other problems that people can have is their stuff will just disappear. So it looks like this. You've accidentally hit the tab key. So just hit the tab key again to bring it all back. Something else that can happen is if you're zoomed out and you can't find your canvas because it's just slid off to the side. If you hit Command or Control 0 on your keyboard, it will recenter and rezoom in your document to a good standard size. So again, resetting your zoom, Command or Control 0, hotkey you want to learn. Finally, there is the nuclear option for returning everything back to the default, which is to delete your preferences. Deleting your preferences can also be a really good thing to do if like a tool is broken and just refusing to work. Frequently, it's a corrupted preference file. To do that, you would quit Photoshop and then reopen it while holding down on an Apple computer the Option Command Shift key, or on a Windows computer the Alt Control Shift keys, and that will prompt you, do you want to delete your preferences? And you would click yes. Now, any customization you've done in the program would go away, and anything in your home screen would go away, but it would restore your preferences. So like if anything just gets hopelessly trashed or tools aren't working, that is a really good option. Finally, if you're on an Apple computer and using a Magic Mouse, your right click will not work. You will need to enable right click, and that is system version specific. But you would come up to preferences and go to system settings and go to your mouse settings, and that will allow you to enable your right click if you are not using a 2-button mouse. And we will be right clicking, so you need a 2-button mouse. All right, let's continue our tour. So over here on the far left are our tools, and basically anything that's above this little arrow thing in these 2 boxes are going to be things that cause your mouse to do something else. Like I have the move tool allowing me to move stuff, but I'd have to unlock this first. I have a marquee selection tool allowing me to mark where I want to work. Or like I even have like the brush tool allowing me to paint colors and stuff across my screen. By the way, you'll notice that my mouse is quite large. I have it enlarged and zoomed in, so it's easier for those of you on smaller devices to see where my mouse is at. When I use certain tools, it will appear very large, and I'll shrink it down occasionally for doing stuff with brushes, but otherwise it'll be large and easy to see. Below all of these tools, I have my active foreground and background colors. I'm going to click this tiny one right there to restore white and black. And these are the colors that are currently active. So like if black is on top, I would paint black. If white was on top, and I can flip it by clicking right here. I would paint white. Similarly, I can access that up here in the color panel. It's nothing we're going to use for a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and undo that Command Z twice so I don't have any marks on my screen. We also have Quick Mask mode, which we won't be using. Quick Mask is a way of quickly making selections and masks. We have our screen modes, like if you wanted to change the way your screen looked. And then we also have the new image generation from Firefly. This is a pared down version and not as powerful version of Firefly 3. If you're going to be doing image generation, this is cool, but I would just open up Firefly instead from Adobe, which we will be doing in later chapters anyway, to make your images because you just have more control. Down here in the bottom right, we have our document information, so I can change like what it's currently looking at. Usually document dimensions is fine. And then I also have a current zoom level. If I wanted, I could type in the zoom level that I wanted there. So like you can put it at a particular zoom if you want, or you could just use hotkeys or the zoom tool. So like I could do Command or Control minus to zoom out, or Command or Control plus to zoom in. And then my favorite, of course, is Command or Control 0 to fit it back on my screen. Finally, we have panels over here on the right. Panels we're going to be using to have additional controls over tools, different ways of controlling what's on my canvas, and ways of keeping everything organized that's kind of cut up and splayed out onto my canvas area as well. So we'll be using a lot of panels. Panels are customizable, so you can always click these little arrows to expand or collapse. You can click and drag panels out and click and drag them back in. You can right-click on panels to close them, and you can always come up to Window and click on that related panel to bring it back into your system. Throughout the textbook, we'll be customizing these quite a bit. For each chapter, my suggestion would be to reset it to the default by clicking the little drop-down and clicking Reset Essentials, which is one we'll be working in for now, to have a consistent appearance across our different chapters. Now, whenever we have a tool active, we've got a new feature from last year, which is this little context-sensitive or contextual taskbar. So the contextual taskbar will look at what you're currently doing in the canvas, look at what tool you have active, and go, I bet this is what you want to do. And honestly, it's not that bad. It does a pretty good job. It is a little obnoxious sometimes where it pops up, because it'll just kind of jump around and be in irritating places sometimes. And sometimes you don't want it, so you could click these arrows and close it so you don't see it anymore. Or you could come up and then you would come up to Window and go to Contextual Taskbar to bring it back. Similarly, you can just say, please don't move from this one spot. Or you could also be like, please go back to where you originally were. Okay, so for our image, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the background from this guy, put in a new background, and then add some text. And this is a pretty common task in Photoshop. Like we're basically making a meme. Now in Photoshop, like we said at the start, our goal is always to be as lazy as possible. So I've opened my image, I have Move Tool active, and we can see down here at the bottom for my contextual taskbar, it's like, I bet you want to remove the background. And I'm like, I sure do. So I'll click Remove Background. And you know what? The background disappears, but so does the guy's head. So here's the problem with some of these quick tools, which is sometimes they don't always give us the results we want. So then we have to move down in terms of complexity of the tool to get the result that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and undo what I just did. So I'll hit Command or Control Z on my keyboard. I'll go up to Edit and Undo in order to undo that background removal that failed. So the next thing that I'd want to do is to make a selection. So I have a background and a subject. So I'm going to go ahead and try this Select Subject button down here in the contextual taskbar. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. And what it's done is it's created a selection. And a selection is a way of me telling Photoshop, I want to work with just one area. So let's say I was painting, which we're not painting in this chapter. Let's say I was painting. Since I have an active selection, see how I'm not making any marks over here, but when I come over the figure, I start making marks. So this selection says, just here, please, for any tool that I'm using. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command Z to undo that. Now, just like with the select subject that we had done, select subject background removal, it's missing the head. In fact, that's probably why the head is missing, because that select subject step was part of that background removal, and it failed. So we're going to modify this selection, adding this head back into it. So over in our toolbar, I'm going to go 1 tool down, 2 tools, 3 tools, 4 tools down. Yours will probably look like this. And I'm going to grab this tool. In fact, actually what I really want is the tool under it. Notice that each one of these tools has a little mark in the bottom right. That tells me that there are similar tools nested together. So I'm going to click and hold on the Object Select tool. So again, I'm clicking and holding on the fourth tool down, and I'm going to pick the Quick Select tool, hotkey W. By the way, you could also simply just hit W on your keyboard, or let's say I was going to go back to the Move tool, V. You can see that it switches between them based on the hotkey. And if yours was defaulting to the Object Select tool, I would hit W, and then I would hold down the Shift key and hit W, and that allows me to cycle through that family of tools. As we move forward in this textbook, I'll be saying a lot of hotkeys, but frequently I will also just go over and click on stuff, so it's just easier for you to see what I'm doing. But I will narrate hotkeys so you can learn what they are, because they do make everything faster. Now, by default, this Quick Select should enter into Add mode. Double check up here in your tool option bar that we've got this highlighted, the brush with the plus sign on it, which will add to our selection. Now, what the Quick Select tool will do is if I just paint over an area, it will try to select. So I'll just do some quick little, I'm clicking, click and drag a little bit, click and drag a little bit. I'm going to click and drag over this to fill in those little dots. And I'm not going to worry about this piece of hair because that piece of hair doesn't select very well, but I'm going to get the rest of this selected. Now, if you mess up, so let's say I go, whoop, and I get some stuff over here, you can always just Command Z to undo it. Or if you just want to start over, you could click Deselect or hit Command D or go up to Select, Deselect on your menu bar to drop the selection and start over. So anyway, I've got him selected. I've got his face added in now, and I want to remove the background. Now, when I remove the background, I want to do this in a way that we call non-destructive. So I want to hide the background rather than delete the background. By hiding the background, at any point, I could come back and restore portions of this image. So let's say I did decide I wanted to bring this hair back later. By doing this with a layer mask rather than deletion, I could always add that back in. It would also make it really easy to just paint out an arm if that was also something I wanted to do. Now, to create a layer mask, I will simply click this button here in my contextual taskbar, or I would click this button, which looks exactly the same, down here in my layers panel. I'll go into a little bit more depth about layer masks in a short video at the end of this lesson, so make sure to hit that here at the end. Now we can see when I made that layer mask, I ended up with a black and white version of my selection over here in my layers panel. And this represents the area that is shown and the area that is hidden. Black being hidden and white being shown. We'll do a lot with layer masks starting in chapter 3. Well, actually chapter 2 as well. We'll do a lot. We'll do a lot with masks because you have to do it in every single chapter of this book. Actually, we will be doing some form of masking. Okay, I want to add in a background image. Now in chapter 2, we'll look at like a dozen different ways of adding in backgrounds. For this one, we're just going to add in using the File and Place Embedded method. Now, depending on the method that you use to add in images, it will actually kind of change how it adds in. So make sure for this one, we're going to use Place Embed. And we're going to grab this chapter 1 Course of Empire Destruction, which is these kind of interesting paintings, not necessarily agreeable, but interesting paintings done by Thomas Cole about the courses of empire. So like this is supposed to be like the collapse of Rome, except Rome doesn't have a seaport. It's an inland city. So maybe this is supposed to be Ostia. Who knows? So when I place in the image, we can see that I've got this blue line X running through it. And then I've got these control points around the outside that would allow me to do things like rotate or resize my image. For us today, what we want to do is we want to mouse over this top center one and drag up. And as we drag up, this pink line will appear telling me that it's staying perfectly center. And when I hit the top, another pink line will appear telling me that I'm snapping the pixel edge to the edge of the canvas. And this is exactly what I want. So I'm going to snap up to that edge and release. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to drag down and it will snap. When I'm happy with this placement, I could hit Enter on my keyboard. I could double click my mouse. I could click Done, or I could click the check mark up here. I tend to just hit Enter on my keyboard. Now immediately we can see we have a pretty serious problem, which is where's my figure? So layers exist in a stack, and you can think of them as like a stack of clear plastic, and then anything that you can see in them is painted onto that plastic, like an old school animation. We'll have a similar discussion at the end of this chapter about it as well. So right here, we can see down here in my layers panel, I've got my layer 0 of my yawning figure and my background layer. My background layer is over my yawning figure, hence I can't see my yawning figure. So I'm going to click and drag this up. Now, something that's a little frustrating about the layers panel is that you can mess everything up by clicking and dragging in the wrong spot. So don't click here on the eyeball, which would, disappear and reappear your stuff. Don't click here on the chain link. We'll talk more about that later. And don't click and drag on the layer mask. For moving layers, you can click and drag on the layer preview, which is this thumbnail, or the layer label. And when you're going to click and drag up, you'll see this little blue line appear. That's telling you where it's about to be placed. So I'll drag up until it's going to be above the Chapter 1 destruction picture, and we can see my figure now appears. Cool. Now again, one of the things that's really neat about using this layer mask is I could always come over here and disable it, so I could bring my initial background back. So layer masks are important. Now I want to reveal more of that image that I placed in here because this composition just isn't great. So let's zoom out a little bit so it'll be easier. So on my keyboard, I'm going to hit Command or Control minus. You could also grab the zoom tool. So you would hit Z on your keyboard to pick up the zoom tool, and you could click and drag in and out to set your zoom level. In my case, I liked the Command 0 to fit on my screen, and then one step out with Command minus. Now to change the size of a canvas visually, so like a click and drag method, I can use the crop tool. So over here in my toolbar, I'm going to come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. I'm going to grab this bad boy right here, crop tool. Could also hit C on my keyboard for crop tool. Now, unfortunately, unlike when we're replacing, when I start clicking and dragging on this control point, it's not going to snap to the edge of this painting. If we had an active selection, it would snap to that, which is pretty neat. And we'll do that in a later chapter. But for this one, we're just going to drag close to the edge and in a little bit. And then over on this side, I'm going to drag close to the edge and then in a little bit. So I don't end up, if I drag too far, I get some transparent stuff and it doesn't look very good, or white stuff. So I want to bring it in a little bit. When I'm happy with my placement, just like with the place tool, I will hit enter or check mark or double click or click done, whatever gives you a giggle to drop in your image. And this already isn't bad. We've got some nice little positive and negative space running along this figure, but I think he would look much better over here on the far left. That would also give us more room to add text right about here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the move tool, or V on my keyboard. Notice that the control box appears similarly to when we're replacing an image. This would allow me to rotate or stretch him if I wanted to, which I don't. I just want to move him. Notice also that this box is going much past what we can currently see because it is matching what is currently hidden by the mask. So keep that in mind with the move tools, that it's going to match the actual image, ignoring the mask. I'm going to click on the figure and I'm just going to drag to the left. And as I'm dragging, notice that these magenta pink lines appear. That's telling me that it's snapped perfectly vertically. And I'm going to drag horizontally over until it snaps to the far left edge. And again, it's snapping to the hidden part of the painting rather than his hand. So very handy. And that looks pretty good. We guys still have some nice little positive negative space forming. We've got a larger version of it here still sweeping in. And then this lady that's running away is running towards his belly. So we got some better imagery here for our meme. Let's go ahead and add one more element to this, which is text. So I'm going to click on the T for text tool. And the T for text tool, you also hit T on your keyboard, is a tool that does two different things versus on if you click or click and drag. Now, a lot of tools in Photoshop will do two different things versus if you click or click and drag. So when you're listening to a direction or following along in the book or video, make sure that you click or click and drag based on what somebody's doing. And we'll get into the details for each one of those tools as they come up. For us today, we want to click and not click and drag. So I'm just going to click anywhere on my canvas. Boop. And I get some lorem ipsum, which is some delightful Latin gibberish that graphic designers used as a placeholder text. And if you have a particularly mean Latin teacher, she'll hand you a paragraph of lore MIP. Someone asks you to translate it, and then watch the classroom go into full meltdown. With this text active, so it just says lore MIPSum right now, I'm going to go ahead and click here, and I want to get this to be white. So if it's down black or whatever, just click and drag up to this top corner, and that will get us white. We can click OK. Similarly, you could actually flip your background and foreground color, so white's on the top, or you could set white over here in your color panel, or you could click up here and get that same thing that we just saw. Again, 9 million ways of doing the same thing. Actually, you can also do it over here in the properties panel. And if we had the character panel open, same thing. For our font, I'm just going to click right here. Mine is already active, but we want Arial Black. So I would just start typing in Arial, and it will bring up any fonts named Arial on my system. And I will grab Arial Black Regular. Sizing wise, I'm going to do 300. And then I'll type in my text, which is oops, I gotta actually click back up in here. Comma, Monday again. And if it runs off the side, that's not gonna be a big deal for us, that doesn't matter. Now the text that we added will behave just, as long as we have the text tool active, will behave just like text in a Word editor. So I can, click on it to highlight, or I can double click to highlight all that text. That functionality stays the same. Now, to exit typing mode, I could come up here and I could click this check mark, or I could switch tools. And vexingly, what we want right now is the move tool. And as long as I'm actively typing, if I hit V, it will just type instead of switch the tool. So I'm going to come over here and physically click on the move tool. Then I will click on my text and move it up to about here in terms of placement to really take advantage of that positive negative space. And that's it. So that's our design, not super hard to make. Now, what's neat about the way that we made it is that our text stays text. I could always come back on here, click, and decide to add an exclamation mark or something. Or let's say I just wanted to change all of it. I'm going to retain that functionality. Or at any point, let's say I wanted to change where this guy is placed, I could move him around because he's still his own layer. Now, to keep this editability, I need to save it as a special format called a Photoshop document, PSD. Luckily, the default format when saving in Photoshop is PSD. So I'm going to come up to File, and I'm going to go to Save. On a Windows computer, your save dialog will look a little bit different, but the core will be the same. If you're on an Apple computer, if you click this little arrow right here, you can have the expanded versus the small version of the save dialog. In the textbook, I'm always going to be using the expanded version. Now we have highlighted text up here, which is our current chapter document name, and I'm going to change this to be Chapter 1 space done. Now, good file naming is going to be essential once you become a professional in graphic arts or art, because you're going to end up with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of files. So well-labeled files will be important. When adding your file name, absolutely do not change anything by typing to the right of the period. We'll talk more about that in Chapter 3. Down here at the bottom, we can see that it's already a Photoshop document, so then I would just have to click Save. Now, for now, we're not going to be able to share this with other people because Photoshop documents are not openable by people without Photoshop. In Chapter 3, we're going to talk about different file formats that you can save documents as to maintain certain aspects of our Photoshop document while also being much more shareable. So we would want to make a JPEG out of this in order to be able to share it. Let's go ahead and close our document because we're done with it. So I could come up to File and go to Close. Or I have this tab for it right here, and this tab behaves just like tabs in a web browser, and I can click the little X to close it. Not so bad. Let's spend a little bit more time talking about layers. So we used layers in this first chapter to hide the background of our yawning figure, and then to also have a background put in its place. So we have an original image, we remove the background, we put in a new background. Now, conceptually, this can be difficult, especially once we start getting a lot of layers. So some of the documents I work with are in the 50, 60 or more number of layers. So it's how can we kind of mentally keep track of what all these things are? And there's going to be many kinds of layers. There's going to be ones that make visual appearance adjustments. There's going to be ones that kind of allow us to transform stuff weirdly. And then there's also just normal ones where there's just content in that layer. So a really easy, good conceptual way to think about layers is what they're based on. So in old school animation, you would have a scene like this. And so like we have our background that our table basically for our object. We have our scene and we have a guy that would be walking along here with this background. So if we broke it down into its components parts, we would first have this table. And on this table, we would have a piece of paper white that would be the base for our animation. Over this, we would then have our painted background, or maybe our painted background is actually on white paper. It can go either way depending on how they're doing it. This background frequently would be bigger than our target size. Like this white piece of paper right here is what we would end up with, like as our actual frame size, or like what the video would actually be sized with. And having the background larger would allow us to move it back and forth to create that illusion of a character moving across the screen. Similarly, we could have a sun, and the sun might, be radiating light throughout the scene, and it's not going to move as the character is walking along. That's just not how parallax works. In front of the sun, and maybe these are moving along, would be some clouds. And then over all of this would be our walking figure. So we have to think about how we're going to put stuff in terms of layer order. And the reason why we can see through this is that in the old school animation, they would paint on clear pieces of plastic, allowing them to take advantages of stuff like this. So instead of having to repaint this whole scene every time, they can just repaint portions of it as needed. Like frequently in the cartoons, you'd see like a character stop and then their mouth would move and the character would remain static. And all they've done is they've just not have a mouth on this layer, and they would make a new layer to paint those mouths on. So as you're moving forward in Photoshop, just think about old cartoons and how they were made in terms of how to visualize and how to set up your layers. Similarly, keeping everything well organized and well labeled, so you can see my file naming system, because these are placed embedded files, and that I've numbered them to make it really easy for me to see the order that they need to go in. So again, keep it organized, think about animation. We'll actually be doing a little bit of animation in Chapter 9 with GIFs. Let's take a closer look at layer masks, because we're going to use masking in pretty much every chapter except for Chapter 4, which is going to be a standalone one for Camera Raw. Oh no, we'll use masking in Camera Raw too, thinking about it. We'll use masking in every chapter of this book. So let's take a closer look at it. So let's say I wanted to combine two images. So I have this first image right here, which has a nice ground in it. I've got this other image over here with a really nice sky in it, and I want to produce this image. Now, the way that we do this is drawing from old school photography. So like with masks drawing, it drew a little bit from animation. In masking, we're going to look at, it's going to draw from old school photography. So to do this in old school photography, let's hide these guys, we would have oops, that's not the one I wanted. We would have an enlarger. So an enlarger up here is a big bright light. Up here would be a film holder, so it'd have like that negative or positive piece of film, that transparent piece of plastic that old photographs used to be on, and then a lens to help focus and place that. Down here at the bottom would be a white piece of paper that would then get exposed by that light. So to do that sky swap in old school photography terms, you would put the negative up in here and it would shine down onto the piece of paper, and anywhere that the light hit would end up with that image on it. So to keep just this sky, you would grab the ground. So let's take a look at the ground. Boop. You would grab an outline from the ground. So if I flip back, we can see that that matches the horizon from the ground. And I would lay that over my piece of paper, and that would allow me to expose just the sky. So this piece right here, you can think of as a mask over here in Photoshop. I am using a paper mask, to mask this area to keep it from being hit with light, meaning that I only will use this part of my image or layer contents. So if we would then go back to enlarge, we'd go back and add in our ground image up into our camera enlarger. I would project this whole image down. I don't want to overexpose the sky, and I don't want the sky from this one. So I take that same horizon, except now it's flipped. So now I've got the top masked off, and I would place that as a piece of paper over my photosensitive paper to block out that light, allowing me to expose just the ground, giving me my final composite image. In Photoshop, it's going to be much easier because we're not worrying about stuff adding up from light exposure onto that piece of paper. So in Photoshop, we would have something fairly similar. So this is kind of splayed out so we can understand what we're looking at. I would still have my ground layer, and my ground layer is going to be above my sky layer. I will then apply a layer mask to hide the sky. So we can see that makes this area transparent. And then as long as it's above the sky layer, it would then create my merged version of it. In fact, we can even see it more clearly. So like here is this. We can even see that it has a mask over here hiding that top area. And when I place it over that, I have my combined images. Now, because this isn't adding up with light, I'm not having to worry about masking out the bottom part of this image, because as long as this is over, this will just hide the stuff underneath it, like what we saw with layers and like the figure that we had in chapter 1. So when you're working in Photoshop, a lot of our tools are going to come from old analog processes. So if the names sound familiar, it's because they're old tools and people used them a long time before this. Accompanying each chapter are going to be a series of images for a practice called the do-it-yourself. And the point of the do-it-yourself is to do exactly what we just did, except on your own. So rather than following a direct step-by-step, you can use the techniques that we just covered to create your own version of an image similar to what we just made. So in this case, I want you to remove the background from one of these images and add one of the remaining images as the background for it, practicing what we just did. And then also add text that is appropriately sized for the image. Like it needs to be big and in charge. Practice some good, design principles. If you want, you can also hunt down your own images. It's just the ones I provided I know will work well for this do-it-yourself. Anyway, I hope you have fun and good luck.